135,000 soldiers. That is the number the book of Judges gives us. Not an estimate, not an approximation. A specific count recorded in Judges 8:10 for the Midianite force that had turned the Jezreel Valley into scorched earth for 7 consecutive years. 135,000 trained, armed, camel-mounted warriors. A force so vast, the text says their camels alone were without number. Against them, God assembled a fighting force of 300 men. Not 300 elite special forces operators. Not 300 armored cavalry. 300 farmers, selected by the way they drank water from a stream. Carrying clay jars, torches, and trumpets. The ratio, calculated directly from the biblical text, is 450 to 1. No military victory in the ancient Near Eastern record has ever been documented at those odds. And tonight, we are going to find out why God did not just allow those odds. He engineered them, deliberately, systematically, twice. Because buried inside the story of Gideon's impossible victory is a strategy so layered, so mathematically precise, and so loaded with meaning that reaches across both testaments of Scripture, that it could only have been designed by one mind. This is not just a story about a battle. This is a blueprint for how God wins when every human calculation says winning is impossible. Close your eyes and go back to the Jezreel Valley, around 1100 BC. The air smells like ash. Not the clean ash of a hearth fire, the acrid, lung-coating smell of burned grain fields. Crops destroyed before harvest. Olive groves stripped to bare wood. Vineyards consumed down to the root. For 7 consecutive years, the Midianites have arrived at exactly the same moment, planting season, and dismantled everything before the Israelites could bring a single harvest to completion. The text gives us the scale of this agricultural devastation with surgical precision. They came up with their livestock and their tents, as numerous as locusts. They came into the land to destroy it. 7 years, every harvest, gone. The Israelites are not living in homes. They are hiding in dens of the mountains. They are threshing grain in secret. They are rationing food that grows scarcer with every passing season. A people who once crossed a sea on dry ground and watched walls collapse at a shout are now afraid to work their own fields in daylight. This is not a single dramatic military defeat. This is the slow suffocation of a people who stopped believing God was still present. And into a particular afternoon of this particular broken season, God sends an angel to find his chosen deliverer. Gideon is not in a field rallying the remnant. He is not sharpening a sword in secret. He is in a wine press, a sunken stone basin carved into the earth specifically to crush grapes, desperately trying to thresh a small amount of wheat before anyone sees him. The physical problem he faces is immediate and almost absurd. Threshing grain requires wind. Wind to catch the chaff and carry it away while the heavier grain falls to the ground. Wine presses are engineered specifically to block wind, sunken, enclosed, sheltered from the elements to prevent the grape juice from splashing during crushing. Gideon is performing a wind-dependent agricultural task in his space, architecturally designed to eliminate wind. He is working directly against the physics of his own situation, in the wrong place, with the wrong conditions, because the right place, the open threshing floor on the hillside, would expose him to Midianite scouts. Fear has made him inefficient. Fear has made him invisible. Fear has put him at the bottom of a pit, doing the wrong job, in the wrong location, with the wrong tools. And it is precisely here, at the absolute nadir of his circumstances, that the angel of the Lord sits down under a nearby oak tree and says something that sounds almost like cruelty. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." But there is far more happening here than meets the eye. Let us begin with the numbers, because the numbers in this story are not incidental detail. They are the central argument. When Gideon first sends out a call to arms across the tribes of Israel, 32,000 men respond. That is not a negligible force. 32,000 men represents a significant military mobilization for a tribal agrarian society in the ancient Near East. These are motivated fighters defending their homes, their families, their food supply, against an enemy that has been destroying all three for 7 consecutive years. At 4-1 against 32,000 versus 135,000, those odds are brutal, but not unprecedented. Commanders have won it worse. God looks at 32,000 men and says, "Too many." He instructs Gideon to make a public announcement. Any man who is afraid may turn around and go home. 22,000 men, 68% of the entire force, accept the offer and leave. 10,000 remain. The odds have now shifted to 13.5-1 against. Still brutal. Still within the range of a desperate last stand by a motivated defending force. God looks at 10,000 men and says, "Still too many." He designs a second test, a water-drinking evaluation at the stream. Men who kneel and put their faces to the water are sent home. Men who bring the water to their mouths with their hands, keeping their heads up, maintaining situational awareness, are kept. 300 men pass. The rest go home. 300 men against 135,000, 450-1. Verified from Judges 8:10. Now look at what God authorizes these 300 to carry into battle. Each man receives a ram's horn trumpet, an empty clay jar, and a torch to place inside the jar. No drawn swords, no bows strung, no siege equipment, no cavalry. The entire offensive arsenal of God's chosen fighting force consists of noise-making instruments, disposable pottery, and fire. What God is constructing is not a military engagement. It is a precision psychological operation designed to exploit the specific vulnerability of a large encamped army in the deepest hour of darkness, when the human nervous system is least equipped to accurately assess incoming threat. 300 clay jars shattering simultaneously in the natural acoustic chamber of the Jezreel Valley would produce a combined percussive impact, registering from every direction at once. In absolute darkness, that sound would be indistinguishable from a vast surrounding army breaking into combat formation.
Sound is everywhere. Where do
No
we
way
run?
to count the force.
It's too many.
No safe direction to run.
God help us.
God did not need 300 swords. He needed 300 pieces of baked clay and the darkness to make them sound like an army. Before we go any further into the mechanics of the battle itself, we need to go back to the wine press, because the name of the man hiding at the bottom of it changes the entire meaning of what we are watching. Gideon in Hebrew is Gideon, derived from the root verb gada, which means to cut down, to hew, to fell. It is an action name. The name of a man who brings things to the ground decisively. A woodcutter, a warrior who strikes and does not hesitate. The first time we encounter this man, he is hiding in a pit, cutting nothing down, felling no one, preserving a handful of grain in a location specifically designed to make the task impossible, because the correct location, the open hilltop threshing floor,
no wind in this wine
feels
press.
too dangerous to occupy.
But the wind does its
His
essential
name
work here.
and his lived reality are in direct contradiction. And that contradiction is not a narrative accident, or a detail the author of Judges included carelessly. It is the entire theological argument of Gideon's story, compressed into a single Hebrew word. The gap between who God names him and who he currently is, that gap is the space where the entire story takes place. When the angel then addresses him as Gibber Hachayil, mighty warrior, he is deploying a technical phrase from Hebrew military literature. This term appears throughout the Old Testament specifically to describe proven combat veterans, men who have distinguished themselves in battle. Men whose fighting credentials are already established and documented. Gideon has established no such credentials. His only documented activity at this point in the narrative is hiding in a pit and asking God why he has abandoned Israel. God is not describing who Gideon will become. After he conquers his fear, he is declaring, in the precise technical language of military commendation, who Gideon already is. From God's perspective, before a single thing about his circumstances has changed. This is the first hidden layer in the story, but the deeper one is in the clay. Clay jars in the ancient Near East were the most ordinary objects in daily life. Every household owned them in multiples. They held water drawn from cisterns. They held olive oil pressed from the groves. They held grain harvested from the fields when the Midianites permitted a harvest to reach completion. They cost almost nothing to produce. They broke easily. They were replaced without ceremony. Nobody built monuments from clay jars. Nobody placed clay jars in a king's treasury alongside gold and carved ivory. They were functional, disposable, entirely unremarkable. The jar is performing two simultaneous functions. It is protecting the flame from the wind that would extinguish it during the approach march through the darkness, and it is concealing the light completely, making 300 active torches invisible to the enemy camp until the precise moment of revelation. When Gideon gives the signal, every man raises his jar and brings it down hard against the ground, as 300 clay vessels shatter against the earth. 300 illusions of Midianite invincibility shatter in the valley below, both breaking in the same instant, by the same hand, for the same purpose. 300 torches, already burning, already alive inside the clay, burst simultaneously into the darkness of the Jezreel Valley. The light was always there, burning inside the ordinary vessel, hidden until the moment of intentional breaking. Now listen to what the Apostle Paul writes in his second letter to the Corinthians, a letter composed approximately 1100 years
after the night of Gideon's battle. We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. Paul does not explain this image as if he is inventing it. He states it as if his readers will recognize the principle immediately because they lived in a culture saturated with the Hebrew scriptures and the stories within them. Paul is reaching back across 11 centuries of Israelite history and pulling forward a principle the Gideon story established and demonstrated on a battlefield, that God deliberately places his power inside breakable, ordinary, unremarkable vessels, so that when the light appears, nobody can credit the container. The theological connection is not interpretive speculation. Paul builds his entire argument about weakness and divine power in 2 Corinthians chapters 4 through 12 on this exact foundation. The clay jar is not a casual metaphor Paul invented for rhetorical effect. It is a direct reference to a principle God demonstrated with 300 pieces of pottery in the Jezreel Valley. The victory does not come from the strength of the jar. It comes from the intentional breaking of it.
The Midianites were not a minor regional nuisance that Israel was embarrassed to be losing to. Archaeological evidence positions them as a genuinely formidable power. Excavations at Kariah in the northwestern Arabian Peninsula, identified by a significant number of scholars as a major Midianite cultural center, have uncovered distinctive polychrome painted pottery, evidence of large-scale copper smelting operations, and trade goods linking the site to Egypt, the southern Levant, and the Arabian interior. This material culture indicates a people with sophisticated economic organization, long-distance trade networks, and the logistical capacity to move large numbers of people and animals across vast distances of difficult terrain. The text itself emphasizes the overwhelming scale of their raids. Camels without number, livestock beyond counting, raiding parties arriving like locusts that stripped everything before them. Whatever the precise composition of their forces, the biblical account describes a mobile raiding machine that had perfected the art of appearing, devastating, and disappearing before any organized defense could form. For 7 consecutive years, they had arrived at harvest time, the moment of maximum agricultural vulnerability, stripped the land, and withdrawn before Israelite tribal forces could mount a coherent response. Gideon was not simply outnumbered. He was facing an enemy whose raids had been so consistently devastating that an entire people had retreated into caves, rather than risk open confrontation, which is precisely why God's strategy required no conventional confrontation at all. Gideon's story does not stand alone in Scripture. It is one node in a pattern that runs from the opening chapters of Genesis to the closing chapters of Revelation. The consistent, deliberate, recurring pattern of God choosing the inadequate vessel so that the victory belongs unmistakably to Him alone. Moses is a stuttering fugitive tending another man's sheep in a wilderness when God calls him to stand before the most powerful ruler on earth. David is the youngest, smallest, most overlooked brother, the one nobody thought worth summoning from the sheep pasture, when Samuel arrives to anoint the next king of Israel. Mary is an unmarried girl in an occupied province with no social standing, when the angel appears with the most consequential announcement in human history. Paul is a persecutor of the church with documented blood on his hands, when the risen Christ repurposes him as the primary architect of its global expansion. In every case, the weakness of the vessel is not the footnote to the story, it is the headline. Because the more impossible the human explanation, the more undeniable the divine one. This is not coincidence. This is architecture. The same architect building the same argument across 1,500 years of recorded biblical history. Everything in this story has been pointing toward a single revelation, and it is time to let it land. The reduction from 32,000 to 300 was not tactical conservatism. It was theological necessity. 32,000 men winning a battle produces a military victory. 300 men winning the same battle at 450 to 1 produces something the biblical text has a specific word for: a sign, evidence of a presence that cannot be explained by the numbers on the field. The clay jars were not a clever improvisation. They were a physical enactment of the principle Paul would spend 1,100 years later trying to put into language: that God hides His most powerful work inside the most ordinary containers and reveals it at the moment of breaking. The Hebrew name spoken over a hiding man was not encouragement. It was a declaration of identity. From the only perspective that has access to the end of a story, while standing at its beginning. And Gideon's fear, the winepress, the wrong tool in the wrong location, was not the obstacle God needed removed. It was the raw material God chose to begin with. Paul captures this principle in 2 Corinthians 12:9 with the words, God spoke directly to him. My power is made perfect in weakness. Not improved by weakness, not compensated for by weakness, made perfect, brought to its fullest expression precisely through the condition that every human instinct identifies as disqualifying. 300 clay jars, 450 to 1. No swords drawn, and an army of 135,000 men, destroying itself in the darkness of the Jezreel Valley. The torch was burning inside the clay the entire time. It just needed the right moment and the willingness to let the jar break. The signal comes at the beginning of the middle watch. Ancient Israelite military practice divided the night into 3 watches. The first watch from sunset to approximately 10 at night. The middle watch from 10 until 2 in the morning. The third watch from 2 until dawn. The middle watch is the deepest point of human sleep, the hour when the nervous system is furthest from wakefulness, the hour when the gap between sleep and threat assessment is widest and most exploitable. Gideon rises. His 300 rise with him. In silence, they move into positions surrounding the Midianite camp, 3 companies approaching from 3 directions, an unbroken ring of hidden fire encircling 135,000 sleeping soldiers. Each man holds his jar in one hand, his trumpet in the other, his torch burning unseen inside the sealed clay. They reach their positions. They wait. Gideon brings his jar down. The sound is not a single crash. It is a thunder. 300 vessels of baked clay detonating simultaneously against the ground. The sound multiplying through the natural valley walls, doubling and tripling back on itself in the acoustic chamber of the Jezreel Basin, until it fills the entire valley, from every direction at once. Before the first echo dies, 300 torches explode into the darkness. 300 ram's horn trumpets split the night air. 300 voices cry in unison, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Inside the camp, 135,000 soldiers wake to what every sensory input available to them identifies as a massive surrounding army in the act of closing. Firelight from 3 directions simultaneously. Sound from every point of the compass. No safe direction. No way to count the approaching force. No time to establish command structure or coordinate defensive response. They draw their swords, and they fight the men standing beside them. The Book of Judges records it, with the quiet authority of a fact that requires no elaboration. The Lord set every man's sword against his neighbor throughout the whole camp. Israel never lifted a sword. The battle was decided the moment God said, "Too many." The most powerful regional military force in the ancient Near East destroys itself in the darkness at its own hand. Not one sword drawn by Gideon's 300. Not one casualty recorded among them. Not one moment where the outcome depended on the strength, the skill, or the courage of the vessel God chose to carry into that valley. 300 broken jars, 300 blazing torches, and the sound of an army discovering that it has no answer for the God who designed the impossibility from the beginning. The winepress was not a humiliating detour before Gideon's real story began. It was the opening scene of the real story. The fear was not a defect requiring correction before God could proceed. It was the condition God chose to work from, in Gideon's case, in Moses' case, in David's case, in Paul's case, in every case across the full sweep of Scripture, where God selects a vessel the world would not have selected, and produces an outcome the world cannot explain. Paul arrives at the end of his own long wrestling with weakness and inadequacy, a weakness he begged God 3 times to remove, and receives this answer in 2 Corinthians 12:9. My power is made perfect in weakness, not supplemented by weakness. not graciously accommodated despite weakness, made perfect, brought to its fullest and most visible expression, precisely in the condition that every human system of evaluation identifies as a disqualification. The clay jar is the image that holds all of this together. Ordinary, breakable,
worth almost nothing in any marketplace, carrying hidden fire that nobody outside can see until the moment of the breaking. And here is where this story stops being about Gideon and starts being about you. What is the wine press you are hiding in right now? What is the task you are doing in the wrong conditions against the physics of your own situation because the correct location feels too exposed, too visible, too vulnerable, too likely to attract the attention of whatever force has been stripping your harvests for longer than you want to admit? What is the clay jar you are carrying that feels too ordinary, too breakable, too unremarkable to contain anything worth bringing into a dark valley? Because the God who looked at a man hiding at the bottom of a pit and spoke the words mighty warrior over him, not as future possibility, but as present reality, that God has not revised his selection criteria. He is still looking for the breakable vessel. He is still looking for the hidden torch. He is still looking for the person willing to raise the jar and bring it down, not because they have resolved their fear, but in spite of it. The Midianite army destroyed itself the moment the jars broke. Your inadequacy is not the obstacle standing between you and what God has called you toward. According to every pattern in this story, and in every story like it across both testaments, it is the qualification. The torch is already burning inside the clay. It just needs the moment of breaking to get out. And one more thing before you go, if you had been there that night, would you have been one of the 300 who stayed, or one of the 22,000 who went home? Be honest in the comments. Every investigation on this channel ends the same way, not with answers, but with a question worth sitting with. Tonight the question is yours. Which layer changed how you see this story? The acoustic mechanics of 300 jars in a valley at midnight, the Hebrew name spoken over a man at the bottom of a pit, or Paul reaching back across 11 centuries to build his entire theology of divine power on 300 pieces of broken pottery? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and your answer shapes where this investigation goes next. If this is your first time here, this is Echo Frame. We go past the surface of the stories you think you already know and find what has been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. Subscribe and turn the notifications on. The next jar is about to break.